History loves to celebrate geniuses, but if you flip a few more pages, you'll realize the world is often redirected by incredibly dumb decisions. A toilet once sank a German submarine. One wrong turn helped ignite a world war. A simple unit conversion mistake made $125 million disappear like smoke. A campaign to eliminate birds led to a devastating famine. And someone genuinely believed lemon juice could make them invisible to cameras. If you had power advisors and degrees covering your walls, are you sure you'd be immune to this list? 31 stories? One common thread. Every single one of them thought they were right. And the first story starts with a toilet. Story 1. The German submarine toilet. In 1945, German submarines were considered engineering masterpieces. Thick steel, advanced weapons, mechanical systems so sophisticated they were nearly impossible to detect beneath the ocean. And then, all of it was defeated by a toilet. U-1206 was equipped with a modern high-pressure flushing system so complex it required a specially trained technician to operate. But in the middle of a war, who really has time to read the manual? Captain Carl Schlitt decided to handle it himself. He turned the wrong valve. Seawater rushed in. The seawater hit the submarine's acid batteries. When those two things meet, they create chlorine gas, which is something you really do not want to breathe inside a sealed steel tube at the bottom of the sea. The crew panicked. With no other choice, they were forced to surface to escape the toxic gas. And at that exact moment, British aircraft spotted them. A state-of-the-art submarine was destroyed. Not by bombs, not by radar, but by not carefully reading the toilet instructions. Story 2. The Lemon Juice Bank Robber. In 1995 in Pittsburgh, a man named MacArthur Wheeler walked into two banks in broad daylight. No mask, no disguise, smiling at the cameras like he was filming a commercial. Why? Because he believed he was invisible. His genius theory was simple. Lemon juice can be used as invisible ink. So if you rub lemon juice on your face, cameras obviously can't see you. Kitchen-level science. To test it, Wheeler took a Polaroid photo of himself after applying the lemon juice. The picture didn't clearly show his face, probably because he angled the shot wrong. But in his mind, that was absolute proof the plan worked. Bank cameras captured his face in perfect clarity. Police arrested him the same day. When shown the security footage, Wheeler was genuinely shocked. He muttered, "But I wore the lemon juice." The lesson: confidence is good. But confidence is not evidence. Story 3. The CIA and the Spy Cat. In the 1960s, at the height of the Cold War, the CIA had an idea that sounded like it was written at 2 a.m. turn a cat into a mobile listening device. The project had a very serious name, a budget of around $20 million, and a confidence level that practically touched the Pentagon ceiling. Surgeons implanted a microphone into the cat's ear canal. They placed a transmitter at the base of its skull. They even ran an antenna along its tail. The plan was simple. Release the cat near a Soviet target. Let it pretend to be a normal cat. Collect state secrets. On the first test mission, the cat was released near a diplomatic building. It walked a few steps and was immediately hit by a taxi. 5 years of research, top secret technology, $20 million. Over in less than 5 minutes. Some projects should have stayed as ideas in a meeting room, or at the very least, existed only as a meme. Story 4. NASA and the unit conversion error. In 1999, NASA launched the Mars Climate Orbiter to Mars. The spacecraft traveled for 9 months, crossing millions of miles, everything perfectly on schedule, until it approached the red planet and disappeared within 5 seconds. The problem wasn't a meteor, not aliens. It was pounds and newtons. One team of engineers calculated thrust using the imperial system pounds and feet. Another team used the metric system newtons and meters. No one caught the difference. No one converted the units. And the spacecraft approached Mars at a completely wrong altitude. Instead of entering orbit, it flew too low, burned up in the atmosphere, or drifted off into space. Total loss of $125 million. After 9 flawless months of travel, everything ended because of a unit conversion. The lesson: 7th grade math can decide the fate of a Mars mission. Story 5. 24 Rabbits in Australia. In 1859, an English gentleman named Thomas Austin looked at the wide Australian countryside and thought, this place needs more rabbits for hunting. So he released exactly 24 rabbits into the wild. Just 24, 2 dozen. Sounds as harmless as ordering 2 boxes of pizza. There was only one small problem. Rabbits are extremely good at reproducing. And at that time, Australia had almost no natural predators to control them. Within a few years, those 24 turned into millions, then hundreds of millions. Eventually, billions, devouring vegetation, destroying crops, causing massive soil erosion. The government built fences stretching thousands of miles. They tried poison. They released viruses. They hired professional hunters. The rabbits kept multiplying like they were running an unlimited promotion. More than 160 years later, Australia is still fighting the consequences. The lesson: nature doesn't check its email before reacting. Story 6. Lake Peigneur. In 1980 in Louisiana, an oil drilling crew was working on Lake Peigneur. Everything seemed normal, until a 14-inch drill bit punched through the ceiling of a massive salt mine directly beneath the lake. Just one small hole. No one thought it would turn into a disaster movie. Then the surface of the lake started to swirl. At first, it was just a gentle circle, like pulling the drain plug in a bathtub. But this wasn't a bathtub. It was an entire lake. The whirlpool accelerated, swallowing the drilling rig, 11 barges, a tugboat, and dozens of acres of shoreline. Even the canal connected to the Gulf of Mexico reversed direction, creating a temporary waterfall pouring backward into the abyss. Miraculously, no one died. But a lake once 11 feet deep became a crater over 200 feet deep and turned permanently salty. It all started with a small coordinate miscalculation. One wrong number, one lost lake. Story 7. The Man Who Jumped from the Eiffel Tower. In 1912, a French tailor named Franz Reichelt believed he was standing on the edge of an invention that would save thousands of pilots. He designed a parachute suit that could be worn like a coat, and when jumping from a height, it would open like wings. The idea sounded heroic and slightly concerning. Reichelt tested it several times using mannequins. The results were not very convincing. But in his mind, the problem wasn't the design. The problem was the mannequins. They weren't flexible enough. A real human body would make it work better. That was his logic. On February 4th, 1912, he climbed the Eiffel Tower. A crowd gathered below. Cameras were ready to capture history. He stood on the ledge and hesitated for about 40 seconds. 40 seconds suspended between fame and gravity. Then he jumped. The suit did not open. It simply folded in on itself like an ordinary coat. The lesson: belief is powerful, but gravity is stronger. Story 8. The Archduke and the Wrong Turn. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria had just survived a failed assassination attempt that morning. A bomb exploded behind his car. He was fine, and he decided to continue the day's schedule as if nothing had happened. Confidence level impressive. Later that afternoon, the motorcade drove through Sarajevo, and then the driver took a wrong turn. No Google Maps, no recalculating route, just a confused moment and the car stopping to back up. Small problem. The car stopped right in front of a sandwich shop, and inside that shop, one of the morning's assassins was sitting there eating lunch, disappointed that the plan had failed. He looked up, saw his target just a few steps away. No chase required, no running. Just pull out the gun. 2 shots. The Archduke and his wife were killed. Military alliances activated. World War I ignited. History doesn't always need a complicated conspiracy. Sometimes it just needs a lost driver and a GPS that hadn't been invented yet. Story 9. Nixon and the Tapes. In 1971, President Richard Nixon had what sounded like a very reasonable idea. Record every conversation in the White House so future history could see just how great he was. Basically a presidential podcast. Except no one knew they were being recorded. A taping system was installed throughout the Oval Office. Every meeting, every phone call, every private remark was preserved. Nixon believed the tapes would serve as proof of his strategic brilliance and diplomatic skill. The problem was, microphones don't distinguish between genius moments and oops moments. When the Watergate scandal exploded, Prosecutors discovered the recording system. And on those tapes, there wasn't just political advice. There were conversations about covering up and obstructing the investigation. The very thing Nixon thought would protect his legacy became the strongest evidence against him. The lesson: a microphone has no loyalty. It just records the truth. Story 10. Mao and the Sparrows. In the late 1950s, Mao Zedong decided China would dramatically increase its grain production, and he identified a culprit: sparrows. On paper, the logic sounded clean. Birds eat grain. Eliminate the birds, get more grain. Simple. Except ecosystems don't run like Excel spreadsheets. The campaign began. People banged pots and pans, refusing to let sparrows land until they dropped from exhaustion. Nests were destroyed, chicks were killed, sparrow populations plummeted. Mission accomplished. Applause all around. Then the locusts showed up. Sparrows didn't just eat grain. They also ate insects, especially locusts. With the birds gone, locust populations exploded and devoured crops across vast regions. The result was one of the worst famines of the 20th century. The lesson: nature doesn't have an on-off switch. And ecosystems don't take political orders. Story 11. The Russian fleet that fired on British fishing boats. In 1904, Russia sent its Baltic fleet on a mission to fight Japan. An 18,000-mile journey, packed with confidence, packed with cannons, and packed with extreme paranoia. The sailors were warned that Japanese torpedo boats could appear anywhere, even in places that made absolutely no sense. As the fleet passed through the North Sea at night, they spotted a few small vessels, not warships, no heavy guns, no Japanese flags, just British fishing boats doing their very normal fishing job. But in their heads, obviously, the enemy. So they opened fire. They shot at fishermen. They shot at each other in the confusion. They nearly dragged Britain into a brand new war. Diplomats had to work overtime to calm everything down. And after all that, when the fleet finally reached the Pacific, Japan destroyed almost the entire force in about 45 minutes. The lesson: when you're paranoid enough, you don't need an enemy. You'll do the damage yourself. Story 12. The Hollywood CEO who dismissed television. In 1946, as television began slipping into American living rooms, many people still saw it as a novelty. One famous Hollywood mogul even declared people will get tired of staring at that wooden box within 6 months. He believed he understood audiences better than anyone. After all, he had produced blockbuster films and launched the brightest stars on the silver screen. In his logic, who would want to sit at home watching a tiny screen instead of going to a theater with a massive display and popcorn? On paper, it made sense. The problem was, American audiences discovered something interesting. At home, you don't have to dress up, you don't have to stand in line, and no one kicks the back of your seat. Within just a few years, television was everywhere. Movie theaters struggled. Studios rushed to produce content for the very wooden box they once mocked. In the end, the little wooden box won. Story 13. Fordlandia, an American town in the Amazon. In the 1920s, Henry Ford decided he didn't want to depend on rubber from Asia anymore. The solution: grow his own in Brazil. He purchased a massive stretch of land deep in the Amazon rainforest and built a fully American-style town. He called it Fordlandia. Neat houses, perfectly straight roads, a golf course, strict rules. Brazilian workers were expected to eat American food, live by American schedules, and follow American social norms. Even the rubber trees were planted in straight lines like cars on an assembly line. The problem was, the rainforest is not Detroit. Trees planted too close together became a buffet for pests and disease. The heat and humidity wrecked the plan. Workers revolted against the imposed lifestyle. After millions of dollars and years of effort, Fordlandia produced almost no significant rubber. The town slowly faded into abandonment. The lesson: the Amazon rainforest doesn't care about assembly line philosophy. Story 14. Dan Quayle and Potato. In 1992, U.S. Vice President Dan Quayle attended a spelling bee at an elementary school in New Jersey. No national crisis, no war. Just a chalkboard and a very harmless word potato. A student spelled it correctly. Completely correctly. But Quayle, holding a cue card prepared by the organizers, believed he had spotted a mistake. With the confidence of the second highest office in the White House, he instructed the boy to add an E at the end. And just like that, potato became potato. Cameras captured everything. The media did not miss the opportunity. Within days, all of America knew about Potato. His other political achievements faded behind one extra letter. Later it was said the cue card itself had been wrong, but the image was already framed. The lesson? In politics, you don't always need a major scandal. Sometimes one letter is enough. Story 15. Luigi Cadorna. 12 battles, same strategy. During World War I, Luigi Cadorna commanded the Italian army on the Isonzo front. He believed in a simple principle. Frontal assault equals honor. If it doesn't work the first time, try again. If the second time fails, try 10 more times. Cadorna launched a total of 12 battles in the exact same area using the exact same tactic. Charged straight at heavily fortified enemy trenches. The result? Italian soldiers fell in waves. Hundreds of thousands of casualties. The terrain didn't change. The enemy was still there. After each failure, he didn't blame the strategy. He blamed the soldiers for lacking fighting spirit. Some retreating units were even punished. Eventually, after another devastating defeat, Cadorna was replaced. His successor changed tactics. The situation slowly improved. The lesson: sometimes the problem isn't the troops. It's the person doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Story 16. The supermarket that offered free coffee. In 2016, the British supermarket chain Waitrose launched what sounded like a very premium campaign. Anyone with a membership card could get free coffee. The idea: customers would sip their latte and casually toss organic cheese and artisanal bread into their carts. It made perfect sense. On a PowerPoint slide. There was just one small detail: no limit on refills. And free is a dangerously powerful word in English. News spread quickly. Taxi drivers realized it was the perfect pit stop between shifts. Homeless individuals found a warm seat and a hot drink with no purchase required. Some stores slowly transformed into public living rooms. Paying customers started struggling to find seats. The premium brand suddenly felt more like a community cafe. The company quietly adjusted the policy. The lesson: in marketing there are powerful words, but free might be the strongest of all. Story 17. Mobutu and the Concorde Runway. Mobutu Sese Seko ruled Zaire for decades, and he had a taste for luxury. In the 1970s, nothing screamed status louder than the Concorde, the supersonic jet that could fly from Paris to New York in just a few hours. Small issue. His country lacked hospitals, proper roads, reliable electricity, but Mobutu had priorities. He built a runway long enough for the Concorde to land right near his palace in the jungle, so he could fly to Paris, shop for designer goods, and return the same day. A supersonic shopping trip. Meanwhile, much of the population lived in poverty. Infrastructure crumbled. The gap between palace and village grew wider every year. When his regime collapsed, Mobutu went into exile. The Concorde runway remained, long, silent, in the middle of the jungle. The lesson: he had a Concorde. His people didn't have clean water. Story 18. Titanic and the iceberg warnings. In 1912, the RMS Titanic was promoted as unsinkable. It was luxurious, massive, a floating symbol of technological pride. And when you believe you can't sink, you also tend to believe you don't need to slow down. On the night of April 14th, several nearby ships sent warnings about icebergs ahead. The messages were received, but the speed barely changed. The ship continued racing across the Atlantic in the dark, almost like it was chasing a record. Then an iceberg appeared directly in its path. There wasn't enough time to maneuver properly. The collision happened. Water poured into the compartments. Titanic didn't carry enough lifeboats for all its passengers. More than 1,500 people lost their lives in the freezing water. The ship didn't sink because it lacked steel. It sank because it had too much confidence. The lesson: confidence is good, but confidence doesn't melt ice. Story 19. The Osborne Effect. In the early 1980s, Osborne Computer Corporation released one of the first successful portable computers on the market. It weighed about as much as a suitcase full of bricks, but at the time people thought it was the future. Sales were strong. The company was growing fast. Everything seemed on track. Then CEO Adam Osborne had what sounded like a brilliant idea. Announce a new model in advance, more powerful, faster, better in every way. The goal was excitement, build anticipation. On paper, it looked like modern marketing genius. But customers looked at the current model and thought, why buy this one if the better one is coming soon? So they didn't buy anything. Sales collapsed almost overnight. The new model wasn't ready for mass production. Revenue stopped. Expenses didn't. The company ran out of cash and went bankrupt. Today, the phenomenon has a name. The Osborne effect. The lesson. The future sounds exciting. But announce it too early and it might kill the present. Story 20. Lysenko and genetics. In the 1930s, Soviet Union Trofim Lysenko rose as a scientific star under Joseph Stalin. He believed crops could be trained to adapt to their environment and then pass those acquired traits to the next generation. In other words, if you force seeds to tolerate cold, their offspring would remember it, like plants attending night school. Small problem. Mendelian genetics doesn't work that way. But Lysenko had one major advantage. His ideas aligned with political ideology. He labeled traditional genetics as bourgeois science. Stalin liked that. And when the leader likes a theory, that theory suddenly becomes truth. Scientists who disagreed were fired, imprisoned, or worse. Agricultural policies based on flawed ideas were implemented nationwide. The result was severe crop failures and decades of scientific setback. The lesson: you can rewrite textbooks, but politics cannot rewrite DNA. Story 21. Nicholas II and the Kodinka Tragedy. In 1896, Nicholas II celebrated his grand coronation. To mark the occasion, the government promised free gifts to the public at Kodinka Field. Bread, sausage, commemorative cups. It sounded like a nationwide grand opening. The problem? More than 500,000 people showed up. The organization did not. Rumors spread that there wouldn't be enough gifts for everyone. Panic erupted. Crowds surged. People were crushed and trampled in the dark. Over 1,000 died within minutes. Nicholas was informed of the disaster. He faced a choice: cancel the evening ball at the French embassy or attend to preserve diplomatic appearances. He chose to dance. Images of the emperor celebrating while bodies were still being collected sparked outrage. Some mistakes don't require a war to shake a regime. Sometimes it only takes one dance at the wrong time. Story 22. The plutonium experiment. In the 1940s, under the Manhattan Project, American scientists were working with the most dangerous material of the time, a plutonium core capable of triggering a nuclear reaction. One experiment earned a name that sounded both cool and terrifying: tickling the dragon's tail. Louis Slotin used a simple screwdriver to keep two hemispheres of plutonium separated by a tiny gap. When they were close enough, a chain reaction could begin. And when you're playing with a dragon, you really don't want your hand to slip. And then, it slipped. The two hemispheres touched. The room flashed with a blue glow. An intense burst of radiation was released in an instant. Slotin quickly separated the pieces, saving the others in the room. But he had absorbed a fatal dose. 9 days later, he died from acute radiation sickness. Science requires courage. But it has limits. The lesson: some dragons should not be poked. Story 23. Mussolini invades Greece. In 1940, Benito Mussolini looked at Adolf Hitler and thought, why does he get all the spotlight? Germany was conquering Europe. Italy, not so much. Mussolini decided he needed a quick victory to prove his status. Target selected: Greece. The plan sounded simple: march in, win fast, take photos, done. Small problem. The Italian army was underprepared, poorly equipped for winter, and they underestimated their opponent. Greece didn't collapse, they counterattacked. Italian forces were pushed back. Instead of a glorious victory, Mussolini ended up in a can-you-handle-this-for-me situation. Hitler had to intervene, invading Greece and Yugoslavia before turning toward the Soviet Union. A delay of a few weeks might sound minor. In war, a few weeks can change an entire winter. Mussolini's ego didn't just cost money, it cost time. And in history, time can decide everything. Story 24. Harry Truman and the volcano. In 1980, scientists warned that Mount St. Helens in Washington state was about to erupt. Authorities ordered residents in the danger zone to evacuate. Most people packed up and left, except one man. Harry R. Truman, the owner of a small lodge near Spirit Lake, had lived there for over 50 years. He gave interviews, laughed, and said the mountain wasn't going to hurt him. In his view, he understood the mountain better than the scientists did. Warnings grew more urgent. The area was sealed off. But Harry stayed. He became a symbol of stubborn, old-school American defiance. I'm not going anywhere. On May 18, Mount St. Helens erupted sideways, triggering a catastrophic explosion. A wave of superheated gas and ash flattened everything for miles. Harry and his lodge vanished beneath dozens of feet of ash. The lesson: you can negotiate with a bank. Nature doesn't sign private agreements. Story 25. Bokassa crowns himself emperor. In 1977, Jean-Bédel Bokassa, leader of the Central African Republic, decided that being president wasn't luxurious enough. He wanted an upgrade. Emperor, not symbolic. A real emperor, with a crown, a throne, and a coronation inspired by Napoleon Bonaparte. Small issue. His country was one of the poorest in the world. That didn't stop a ceremony costing tens of millions of dollars, consuming a huge portion of the national budget. A gold-plated throne, lavish robes, thousands of guests, music echoing through the capital. Meanwhile, many citizens lacked proper hospitals or basic roads. The world looked on and raised an eyebrow. The people looked on and grew angry. Extravagance in the middle of poverty is not a long-term stability plan. Just a few years later, Bokassa was overthrown and forced into exile. The lesson: you can buy a crown, but a crown can't hide reality. Story 26. The Austrian army that shot itself. In 1788, the Austrian army marched to confront the Ottoman Empire. The night before battle, a group of soldiers discovered some merchants selling schnapps near the river. They bought all of it, because obviously nothing prepares you for war like getting drunk. When another unit arrived and wanted a share, an argument broke out. Someone fired a shot. In the dark, among soldiers speaking multiple languages, someone shouted Turks. That was enough. Panic spread faster than logic. Cavalry charged into infantry. Artillery fired at their own troops. Soldiers trampled each other while fleeing an enemy that hadn't even arrived. By morning, thousands were dead or wounded. 2 days later, Ottoman forces showed up and barely had to fight. The lesson: when panic takes over, you don't need an enemy. Sometimes the biggest threat is yourself. Story 27. Sergeant Yokoi. World War II ended in 1945. Japan surrendered. The world moved on to a new chapter, except for one soldier, Shoichi Yokoi, on the island of Guam. Yokoi believed honor did not allow him to surrender. When U.S. forces took the island, he hid in the jungle and waited for new orders. The problem was, those orders never came. He found leaflets saying the war had ended. He heard Japanese voices, but he believed it was propaganda, so he kept hiding. For 28 years, he survived in a cave, eating snails, rats, weaving clothes from plant fibers. While the world invented color TV, rock music, and even sent humans to the moon, Yokoi still believed he was on duty. In 1972, 2 local hunters accidentally discovered him. When he returned to Japan, he said, "I return with shame." The lesson: loyalty is admirable, but sometimes it needs an update. Story 28. Chamberlain and Peace for Our Time. In 1938, Europe was stretched tight like a wire. Adolf Hitler demanded the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain believed war could be avoided if leaders talked long enough and signed in the right place. He flew to Munich, shook Hitler's hand, returned to Britain holding a signed document. Before a cheering crowd, he raised the paper and declared peace for our time. It felt like the trailer for a movie with a happy ending. The problem: Hitler didn't see it as the finale. Just 11 months later, Germany invaded Poland. World War II officially began. Chamberlain wasn't naive because he lacked intelligence. He simply believed that if he was reasonable, others would be too. History later tied his name to the policy of appeasement and a bitter lesson about misplaced trust. The lesson: some signatures look impressive, but not every signature can preserve peace. Story 29. Thomas Migley. Thomas Migley Jr. was the kind of inventor you'd invite to every meeting. Smart, creative, fast problem solver. In the 1920s, he found a way to eliminate engine knocking by adding lead to gasoline. Problem solved. Engines ran smoother. Applause all around. Small issue. The lead didn't disappear. It went into the air, and into everyone's lungs. And he wasn't done. Midgley also helped develop CFCs, a safe refrigerant for refrigerators and air conditioners. Brilliant. Until scientists discovered it was destroying the ozone layer, Earth's shield against harmful radiation. Two inventions. Two solutions that looked genius at the time. Both left environmental damage lasting decades. Midgley didn't set out to harm the planet. He was just exceptionally good at solving the immediate problem without seeing the bigger picture. One man, two inventions, and the entire planet paid the price. Story 30. Lake Peigneur, when geography got reset. Imagine standing beside a peaceful lake about 11 feet deep. Calm surface, birds flying overhead, fish swimming below. A perfect Louisiana postcard. Then, because of one drill bit placed at the wrong coordinates, the lake begins to swirl like someone just pulled the world's largest bathtub drain. Water roars down into the salt mine beneath. The drilling rig disappears. Barges slide into the hole like toys. Trees are dragged straight into the earth. Even the canal connecting the lake to the Gulf of Mexico reverses direction. Instead of flowing out to sea, salt water rushes backward into the lake, forming a waterfall dozens of feet high. It sounds like the final scene of a $100 million disaster movie. When it was over, the 11-foot deep lake had become a crater more than 200 feet deep and permanently salty. The lesson. One wrong coordinate doesn't just mess up a map. Sometimes it resets the geography. Story 31. The man who turned off the alarms because they kept beeping. In 1986, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, a safety test was scheduled. Sounds reassuring. Safety test is the kind of phrase that makes everyone relax, unless you start disabling safety systems to make it more convenient. During the night shift, warnings kept flashing, lights blinking, alarms sounding. The system was practically shouting, "Don't do this." But when you hear beeping long enough, it starts to feel like a morning alarm clock, annoying instead of terrifying. Supervisors believed everything was still under control. Several protective mechanisms were switched off to continue the experiment. Minutes later, the reactor exploded. The blast triggered one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. Thousands were affected. An entire region was abandoned for decades. The lesson: sometimes warning systems aren't bothering you. They're trying to save you. No one in these 31 stories woke up thinking today feels like a great day to become a cautionary tale in history. They all believed they were right. They had power. They had data. They had advisors. And most importantly, they had confidence. History rarely changes course because of obvious villains. It usually shifts because someone is absolutely certain they cannot be wrong. Now it's your turn. 50 years from now, who alive today do you think might end up on a list like this? Drop the name in the comments. Hit like if at least one story made you say, "There's no way." And subscribe if you enjoy stories that sound fictional, but are completely real. Because the most dangerous thing in history isn't ignorance. It's absolute certainty that you're always right.